Good afternoon. On behalf of the Inter-American Development Bank, we welcome you to the event Refocusing Extraction Towards Development. IDB President Luis Alberto Moreno will be joined by Sean Tupper, Associate Deputy Minister of Natural Resources of Canada, Álvaro Garcia, former Chilean Minister and founder of Alianza Valor Minero, Claudia Jimenez, Executive Director of the Dialogue Group on Mining in Colombia, and Agustina Guerre, IDB Infrastructure and Energy Sector Manager. This conversation will be held in Spanish and English with interpretation. Please select the language of your choice by clicking the world icon in the lower level of your screen. Para escuchar el evento en español, haga clic en el icono del mundo.
To hear it in Spanish, you click on the world icon at the bottom of your screen and select your language of choice.
Bueno, muy buenos días a todos o buenas tardes ya.
Good morning or maybe good afternoon to all of you. I would like to welcome Claudia, Sean, and our good friend Álvaro, who's been working with these topics for some time now. The truth is that the debate of the extractive industries make the proposers and detractors find a dead end. The use and extraction of natural resources, some consider the extraction of welfare or the affectation of the environment. This has been a challenge to actually achieve a true compromise on how to make natural resources of value for the region and turning the sector into a sustainable practices industry. In fact, in Latin America, as Alvaro was saying, Latin America is a power in mining and energy resources. Just Peru and Chile have about 40% of production of copper in the world. And activities like mining do produce raw materials that are indispensable not only to generate employment, but to generate income as well. And without a doubt, they are a fundamental resource with an enormous capacity for redistribution. The extractive industries in Latin America contribute with the greatest source of foreign currency and therefore help us improve the competitiveness in our countries. But when these extractive activities are done incorrectly, they may cause not only irreparable damages to the environment, but also can affect weak environments and affecting the disadvantaged communities. In this region, we have enormous mineral deposits. A high number of conflicts have arisen as a result of this. And on the other hand, there are two large world trends who insist that the long-term demand for raw materials generate expansion of the world middle class and rapid urbanization. For 2030, most of the new world consumers will live in cities, as in fact is already occurring in Latin America, with needs that go from air conditioning to electronic products, such as the screens that we're using today to be seen. And in fact, in this context of decarbonization and energy transition, our region has the advantage of being a mineral power with products such as copper, iron, silver, lithium, and aluminum, which are indispensable for this transition. In light of all these challenges, a few years ago at the IDB, we convened a group of experts from the sector coming from 12 different countries in the region with government perspectives, industry, civil society, to help us think how we could change this sector into an effective and sustainable motor for development in the future. And after lengthy discussions and analysis, the group developed a set of recommendations with a long-term view to help strengthen public institutions as well as modernize the infrastructure and increase our competitiveness, thus improving all the mechanisms for relations and public consultation. These and other action priorities are found in this report we published recently, which we hope will serve as a guideline, not only for the governments, but also for all civil society, and of course the private sector. And now I would like to invite to our conversation our guests. First, Álvaro García Hurtado, as we said, was a former Economics Minister of the Presidency in Chile, Claudia Jimenez, who's worked with the government in Colombia as well as in the mining industry, and Sean Tupper, current Deputy Minister of Natural Resources in Canada. And thank you to all of them for being here with us. Alvaro, let's start with you. I recall years ago with President Lagos, they brought this idea of the mining value, and the methodology was really an inspiration, especially for the region. And without a doubt, the Chilean experience has been successful in its conception. And in that, I want to thank you, Alvaro, for everything you've done to help us move this initiative at the IDB. Tell us a little bit, Alvaro, what's been the secret to implement this constructive process, which goes beyond the simple dialogue or a vision, a shared vision on the role that the extractive industry should play in the Latin American countries? He's got his microphone off, unfortunately. Yes, to turn on the microphone. I knew that was important. Yes, welcome, and then go ahead. Well, first of all, thank you, President, for this invitation and for this opportunity to share with you. I think I'd mention two elements from our experience. The first is the plurality of the visions and actors who participated in the process, which in my opinion is an indispensable condition to have public policies or state policies that will remain in time. Society has changed radically as a result of the information technology. All the society's voices can be heard now. And thus, if we don't create the appropriate spaces to allow them to participate effectively, the policies will definitely not be very successful when implemented. Hence, a key emphasis was allowing all voices to be present: entrepreneurs, union members, indigenous people, communities affected, and so forth, all those who were interested parties. And for the plurality of voices to be able to work together, we had to find a topic that would bring them all together, which, as you rightly said, President, mining has voices in favor and voices against. So the invitation was to talk about how we could allow mining to make the development of our countries sustainable. And in the development of our countries, we did agree, all of us. The second element, in my opinion, and I'll end with that, is to respond to the two dimensions that all dialogue processes have: the emotional dimension, which has to do with the trust between the participants, and the rational dimension, which deals with the ability to have an impact that one will always have in the process. Those two dimensions were very well seen throughout the process. The trust, we worked through knowledge, and we invested a great deal of time in interaction between all of us beyond the working spaces and in obtaining results which were predefined so that the people could see that the process was going to succeed. And the rational dimension was by providing information which was important for all of the actors and before the meeting, so that once they came, they had a leveled field. And also we designed a mechanism that would allow the actors to continue to cooperate from their job sites, from their homes, in a more reflexive manner, talking to the different people who thought similar to them, and having an impact through a document that was developed in a digital manner. Plurality, trust, and a leveled field, I believe, are the conditions that allowed us to achieve the success you know about. Thank you very much, Alvaro. Claudia, I'd like to ask you, Colombia has had a lot of conflicts around the question of whether there should or should not be any mining and these problems with the communities. You've worked not only in the industry, you've also been in government. And today you lead the dialogue group on mining. How can we reach that program and that social consensus amongst people who disagree regarding the mining value in the territory? Microphone, please. She's not got her microphone on. Same as Alvaro. I think it's always useful to have the microphone on, right? Thank you, President Moreno, and thanks to the IDB, the team, Natasha, for your invitation. And before I answer your question, President Moreno, allow me to give you two brief ideas. First, that I would like to send a solidary thought full of love for our friend Ramon Espinaza, a friend of all of us, a leader of our group, who I'd like to invite us all to thank Ramon. I think he'd be very happy to see that this project is being launched today by you. May he rest in peace. And second, President Moreno, I think it's time to welcome you back to Colombia. You'll be ending your mandate soon with success, with enormous achievements in the Ibero-American region. I'm so proud to know that you're from our country, and welcome back. And I'm sure that this topic that we're dealing with today will be one of the key challenges that you'll be able to see live. To achieve a consensus between opposing ideas is not easy. And I think that the CLASE, which is the name of our group of Latin America and the Caribbean that deals with the extractive industry, we call ourselves CLASE. This IDB exercise is an excellent example of how this type of invitation to find consensus works, to get into greater detail and what unites us and not what separates us and not what divides us. And I think that one could begin with the following ideas. First, a good deal of inspiration. Valor Minero inspired CLASE and the HEDIAM in Colombia. The mining dialogue exists for over 6 years in Colombia. I've talked to you several times about this group with the IDB support. And I believe that CLASE is an excellent example because it believes in the methodology of the dialogue amongst opposing. And the person who convenes it, the fact that the IDB did it in the region was very important. All of us who are sitting here believe in the neutrality in the space and in what the IDB means for our region. In Colombia, we were convened by the IDB and by the Ford Foundation, and it's important to know who convenes, who finances. Secondly, Alvaro mentioned also the fact that to get people around the table who are not necessarily thinking different regarding the mining industry, but who have an opposing idea and a contradictory idea about a specific activity, there has to be one common element, and that is their individual will to find a consensus, to come to a common compromise. And that's only achieved when there's true interest in the country, and one is capable to leave aside some of our beliefs, no matter how important they may be, because we're being called to find a common element. And in CLASE, that common element was the sustainable development of our countries, of our territories within the next 20 years. And we gave it a deadline. All of us around that table in CLASE, the 25 people from 12 countries that you mentioned, were there motivated because we had that interest in mind, regardless of the ethnic value or the environmental interest or the institutional establishment, entrepreneur, civil society, no matter where we came from, we all believed in the possibility of, or we were united by the motivation of having a sustainable development, but development of our territories. And that balance, that common element, I think is the first powerful tie that will allow us to sit around the table and talk to people that think differently from us. And second, a method, a source of inspiration, which was wonderful. And Alvaro, the former minister of Chile, did it as well in Chile with the Valor Minero and in Hediam in Colombia, and now with CLASE in Latin America. And the projection is to bring down to earth all those things that we did in the meeting with the 12 countries we participated. And the third, I think, is deliberation dialogue, an exchange, sitting there and hearing what others have to say, not having our own discourse, which is going to be objecting what is being heard. I think Alvaro mentioned the fact that we need some type of empathy. We need some type of willingness to hear what they have to say and try to understand what the other person is saying. And I think that in the document you find that very clearly, and that is that we, the extractive sector, moves like in a closet, in a closed space with enormous mining reserves. And our countries are the main producers of copper, iron, zinc, silver, gold, and recently lithium. We represent close to 9%. Peru has 9% of the world supply of minerals and 5% of things like oil. We as a region have 9% of the world supply and 5% in the gas supply. And you already mentioned the macroeconomic data. Close to 5% of the IDP, of the GDP of our countries is in the extractive sector, maybe 50% of the exports of almost all countries except for Mexico, maybe. And in foreign direct investment, this sector represents on average a fourth of the investment we receive in our countries. And then on the other hand, we are very rich in biodiversity, not only in geologic reservoirs, oil and mining. We also are always amongst the top 10 of systems protection, sensitive biodiverse protections, ecotourism, nature, flora, fauna, birds, and we have to find that balance. And that's why the comparative advantages of the environment vis-a-vis the comparative advantages of the extractive sector will generate conflicts in the territories themselves, economic conflicts, social, environmental. So when we understand that the goal is to find the right balance for the sustainable development, whose benefits will be equal to or greater than the impact, then we feel moved to achieve a purpose, and then we can find the dialogue as we're seeing here with the class president. Thank you so much, Claudia.
And welcome, Sean Topper is the Deputy Minister of Natural Resources from Canada. And Sean, you know, we all always, you know, in Latin America look up to Canada, and certainly I've learned to really appreciate Canada's commitment to multilateralism. I've seen it firsthand at the IDB. You're an amazingly strong partner to us and to everything that we try to do in this hemisphere, which, by the way, Canada is a very important part of this hemisphere. And given your experience, because, you know, Canada is very similar to many of the Latin American economies that is highly dependent on basic commodities. But the role of the private sector when starting operations in a new country, and how can governments ensure that those operations are sustainable and learning as they come to operate in economies such as ours? And welcome. Over to you, Sean.
Thank you. Frankly, many of my comments, I think, will reflect some of the comments that have already been expressed. And I think it is about that understanding that there are multiple lenses. There's that plurality of voices that need to be at the table. And I think where we are succeeding, starting to succeed in Canada, is that clear understanding and that ability to kind of set a table that has industry and civil society and environmentalists and other players come together to kind of think through the direction sectors play. In Canada, this is just paramount. We, you know, our natural resources sector, which is energy, mines, and forestry, makes up almost 1/5 of our GDP. So we can't move forward unless we find solutions that allow those sectors to contribute to our economy, but at the same time, start making that move towards the government's commitments, both with respect to our 2030 commitments, but equally the decarbonization of our society and the move to net zero by 2050. And we have spent a huge amount of time, particularly in the last year, trying to demonstrate for people how critical the mining sector is to that overall agenda, that creation of a value chain that allows us to say that mining is as much an energy conversation. The critical minerals, the rare earth elements that go into clean technologies and the ability to make those transitions towards a decarbonized society are just critical. And so that ability to kind of have a table where industry understands the import of those other objectives, that it's not just the bottom line, has been important. Identifying for people the really basic goods that private sector brings to communities. We've been developing through this summer, getting ready for the return of our parliament in the fall, some really new ideas about how, if we can express how companies are going to reduce cost to consumers. If you are energy poor, if you can't afford to turn your lights on in your house, then the ability for us to work with industry to reduce those costs, to create, wealth for individuals, whether it's through jobs or whether it's just through the better function of our economy, those are things that we're trying to bring industry together with government and to arrive at that good stewardship. So we have been putting a lot of emphasis on the principles of ESG, looking at how we bring environment, social policy, and good governance together. You would see some of that in some of the progress we're making in Canada with respect to embracing UNDRIP and looking at the role Indigenous communities can play in the forward movement of resource development in our economy. And again, getting industry at that table and getting industry to invest and getting industry to appreciate that simple and basic investments that partner with our Indigenous communities actually help them thrive and help them build stronger companies and more resolute projects because they're built on transparency. They're built on the fundamentals that allow people to engage and allow people to embrace resource development, as opposed to some of the dialogue we've seen in Canada where it seems almost like communities and industry are at war, where they don't seem to share common objectives. And I think for us and for countries that are seeing new companies come in and trying to establish themselves, I think that would be at the real core of what you'd want to see is that those companies are coming in a transparent way, that they're expressing the ideals of ESG, that they're demonstrating that they're there for more than just themselves. I think we're starting to look at ways that companies can do things beyond just straightforward employment programs, for instance. We're trying now to conceive, are there ways that mining and other industries can invest in supporting offenders coming out of our prisons? In Canada, we have a real overrepresentation of Indigenous people. They make up about 4% of our population, but they make up almost 30% of our offender population. So are there ways that companies can work with our correctional service to do training and education that allow these people real opportunity when they leave a prison, leave our correctional facilities and go back to their communities, which are oftentimes close to our mining and energy projects? Maybe there are ways that we can create linkages there that allow companies to really appreciate the kinds of social investments that they can make that go on top of just the critical economic investments that they're making. And so I think those are some of the really critical things. We are certainly encouraging companies with over 50% of Canadian mining activity located in Latin America. It's fairly critical for us that we are making sure that our companies are doing all that they can do to contribute to well-being in those countries. And so I think for us, as we think through from a policy perspective in terms of making sure companies are conducting themselves well, that you are assured as you engage that you have good partners in looking at Canadian companies. And again, that is something that we are engaging with our industry to help make them understand the kinds of things we're doing. I could go on, and maybe I'll stop because I know we want to have a bit of a dialogue, but that gives you just a sense and a hint of some of the principles and some of the approaches that we're bringing to that dialogue between government and industry.
Thank you very much for those comments, Sean, and we'll go back to you. But clearly, it's always good to remember that Canada is home to some of the biggest and the more diverse mining companies, and about a third of the mining projects in the world are today in Latin America. So this relationship with Canada and Canadian companies is very, very important. Let me just now switch to Spanish and go back to Alvaro.
Español. Alvaro, one of the things that I was drawn to once we met was something that seldom is known, and that is the fact that there's a whole industry next to mining, which basically is an industry associated to all types of services, such as services to the mining industries, metal mechanics. Tell us a little bit of this industry, which could well be a global quality in Latin America towards the world. Well, that is one of the great challenges that Clase brought up for the region, to enrich the productive apparatus around mining. This has been developing, but still only in a very initial way. And we believe that the enormous opportunity offered by the extractive sector to our continent is to enrich that productive apparatus. A typical transnational company, and I'm not going to mention it, but they all look very much alike, when they set up in their country of origin, will purchase 52% of the input in the country. When they set up in another country, they buy 12% of the input in their country. If we translate that into the Chilean situation, for example, that difference between 52 and 12 is $12 billion a year. Imagine the industry that could grow around the purchasing power of $12 billion a year. I think that that's our great challenge. Australia, for example, exports 30 times more products related to mining than Chile, despite the fact that Chile has a mining sector which is much greater than Australia. So we're lagging behind in that respect. There are certain industries linked to mining that makes it very difficult for us to penetrate these industries because they're so mature worldwide. But there are others where we have enormous comparative advantages, and these are the industries of the future. And I'm talking of the challenge of the climate change. To respond to that challenge from the level of the mining industry basically means a whole change of the energy materials, not only the energy supply, also fuel for transportation and things like that. Peru, Mexico, Chile, who are 44% of the world supply of copper, have at the same time the largest sun radiation in the world. So we have a wonderful opportunity to develop a solar industry, not only generating energy, but generating supplies for the solar industry, which would be enormous, producing cheap energy, producing green hydrogen to reduce the greenhouse gases for mining transportation. All this is a potential of highly positive area worldwide where we're starting at an equal level and we have even better conditions because we have natural conditions in our continent.
I think that the major change we face and the challenge is that to take advantage of all the different areas to penetrate future industries from the basis. And a short message, I do believe the IDB can play a crucial role in the matter. The IDB is already an important lender to the industry, but if it can integrate the effort in the region, and that is being done already, as we have seen, it could take on this challenge on a stronger footing. And industry having to do with the energy matrix is a major opportunity. The desalination industry that at some point in time will be important to all of our countries and is already very active in the mining sector, is another opportunity to face one other environmental challenge confronting the world. Looking at environmental challenges and how mining adapts to it, I think is a great opportunity for us to increase the complexity of the mining industry and its apparatus. That's very important because a lot of public policy makers are thinking today is, after COVID, how will we see growth? In the rest of the world, in our countries, Colombia, Chile, we are very reliant on foreign trade, and our economies cannot grow without that important component of foreign trade. So the question is, where is the growth if the rest of the world isn't growing? And I would say that there are clearly two major sources, and that is how to substitute imports in an intelligent or smart way. Let us think, for instance, of food. When it comes to food, we have tremendous potentials, but all of our countries nonetheless import grain. Colombia, for instance, imports a lot of tomatoes from Chile, whereas they could be grown in the country. And there are thousands of similar examples. But now thinking about mining, and you mentioned this, solar energy, we have financed projects in very remote communities in the northern part of Chile where the great power exists in that country, and it's all solar energy. What's missing? So that the companies that set up business in our countries, for them, what do they need to look for these solutions, these alternatives that you were referring to? Perhaps we need more integration between the large mining countries. And we've got the example of copper in Mexico, Peru, and Chile. Where are the bottlenecks that don't allow us to develop these public goods in our countries? Well, I believe that there are two errors here. On the one hand, there is very low investment in our countries when it comes to technological investment. For instance, in solar energy, we have solar radiation that is very different to that in countries that produce solar energy, such as basically today. So what we ought to be doing is developing our own photovoltaic cells that are adapted to our reality. And that would mean that our industry would be more competitive. It's not rocket science. It's absolutely feasible in Latin America. But right now, we're investing approximately 10% in relative terms of what's being invested by countries that are more developed in technological innovation, and that needs to change. And another issue, and it's even more difficult to achieve, is to have a more collaborative spirit within and amongst the extractive sector industries. Unfortunately, we don't frequently see any of this. Many countries have resorted to obligatory mechanisms to promote that kind of collaboration. But without collaboration, we're not going to be able to make progress. Thank you very much, Alvaro. Claudia, one of the topics that we always talk about in this kind of discussion is the time of communities, of companies and governments. And those timelines are not usually reconciled. How can we have a fresh and frank dialogue that would make it possible to align all these stakeholders? Her microphone is muted. She's still muted? Okay. Yes, it was blocked. I don't know why. It was frozen. In the Clase publication, we've already heard discussion about these topics as to the attributes that the extractive sector can achieve in our countries. We have talked about institutional sustainability, economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental. When we look at the social sustainability, the dialogue must continue with the characteristics that we've already described, but it must also be very realistic. and moving away from academia and moving from words to action, to practice. So a key point in these dialogues is that in addition to seeking consensus, when a consensus is reached, that we be able to then take it to the decision makers, both public and policy. For instance, in our chapter on social sustainability, we have specific, or CLASE has set goals such as having gender equity in an industry that traditionally has been dominated by men. We propose that voluntarily we focus on gender equality, and at least the extractive sector in Latin America become the first in the world where there is a gender factor within the sector. And work security, this is a social sustainability issue that is very important. We wanted to achieve 0 deaths in our companies at least, and work and build so that we can achieve also 0 deaths amongst the labor among the vendors and suppliers. So this target, I think, does tie in with your question, Mr. President, as we become more inclusive in construction, in implementation, and monitoring and evaluation of public policy, then we will be more successful. So we need to open these opportunities to have a shared dynamic vision, but to make a country decision. As a country, we can't, some be against minors and others pro-minors. In Chile, although there is some opposition, they decided to leverage this and through a mining income, and that has generating savings and stabilization, which CLASE has proposed. We have created a development fund for development of local institutions so that the mining industry can achieve visibility in the communities and having a shared value. We also have some proposals for prior consultation because this is crucial in today's world. So thinking about these examples, we must make a decision as a country where those who contribute to developing, implementing, and monitoring and evaluation, all of those involved should be absolutely everybody, from the businessman. It should all be like having a conductor, national orchestra conductor. That has to be the government, so that the mining industry could be something in which to leverage the development of our countries. And it should also be part of the economic and social reactivation plan post-pandemic or during the pandemic. We'll have to see. Thank you very much, Claudia.
Has been a real champion of gender equality and sustainability. Tell us a little bit of how those 2 types of challenges, which are critical to this sector, can be developed, and how are you looking at this in the Canadian context, and what lessons could we learn across Latin America from that Canadian experience? Sean, you're muted.
It's our terrible habits, isn't it? And we're not accustomed to being muted. That's the worst part, is we've just taken it so easily. It's a great question. I think, you know, through our experience with COVID and whatnot, it has really exposed so many vulnerabilities in our societies, and we really, I think, have to work collectively, internationally, to make sure that we don't get lost in some of the struggles that have arisen as we try to pay attention to, you know, kind of the impact on racialized communities that we've certainly seen in the United States and has come to Canada in terms of identifying some of those weaknesses. Certainly gender has been an issue for Canada under our current government since it came to power. It's kind of made some of that effort a little bit easier when you've got a PM who moved very quickly to balance his cabinet and indeed all of the government appointments that are done at that level through cabinet gender and racial equity are primary considerations. And I think it really comes down to governments being committed, governments setting targets, and really trying to follow through on how they're doing. And so having appropriate measures to see the direction you're going, and so that you can correct if you realize you're not going to achieve those objectives. In our energy sector, we've set equal by 30 as a target for gender equity in the energy sector. And we've had, it's an international endeavor that we've led. We're setting in the mining sector, where I think it's 14% of women are represented in the mining sector. So we've got a slightly steeper hill to climb there. So we have set a specific target of reaching 30% representation of women in the mining sector by 2030. And I think that those are really the critical things. I think oftentimes we get caught up in these conversations, and we talk about the utopia, even as we talk about decarbonization and net zero. We talk about getting where we want to be, but we actually don't talk a lot about the plans. What are the specific concrete steps that need to be taken? And I think in this instance, when we're talking about equity, whether it's for women or racialized minorities, it is about really concrete, transparent plans. And so those are things, again, as we plan for economic recovery coming out of COVID, that will be very present in the announcements that the government makes in the coming months around the kinds of investments it's going to make. There will be declared targets and declared ambition that is concrete and measurable with respect to making sure we have a diverse and inclusive workforce as we move forward. And I think that those are the really critical fundamental things.
Well, thank you very much, Sean. Y quisiera agradecerles a Álvaro.
I'd like to thank Alvaro, Claudia, and Sean in particular for their participation in this important conversation. I have no doubt that there is no greater source of income for our countries than to develop in a more sustainable and friendly way, more inclusive and environmentally conscious, because our countries are strong mining countries with strong ethic considerations. So I do believe that this is a core topic, and we have a lot to learn from the Canadian experience, and for instance, how Canada shares the royalties with different communities. There's a lot to be done from the public sector, as Claudia said. It requires leadership from government, but it cannot be a traditional look as we had before in simply issuing a license. No, now we need to build value. And this has to go through the communities, through the government sectors. And that is precisely what we attempt to do with this document. I'd like to thank Agustina Guerra and all our team who have been involved. As Claudia pointed out, Ramon Espinosa, may he rest in peace, he would be so happy today to see that that idea that we started developing together remains alive, and that his name is a good way to recall him. Let me also tell you that on 30 July, later this week, we will be launching our major study, one prepared annually by the bank, this year on infrastructure and everything having to do with infrastructure. This is our flagship publication. We hope you will join us, and I'd like to thank Claudia, Alvaro, and Sean. Good afternoon and goodbye to all.